I am delighted to rise today to speak in support of Bill S-246, an act respecting Lebanese Heritage Month. And I speak quite selfishly, since Senator Cordy's bill gives me such a wonderful opportunity to share with you more of the Alberta history that I love. I want to take you back to 1905, the year Alberta entered Confederation. The province was booming with the arrival of waves of pioneer settlers. In 1901, the population of Alberta had been just 73,000. By 1905, it had more than doubled to 160,000. And among the newcomers to arrive that year was young Alexander Hamilton. No, not that Alexander Hamilton. Not the $10 founding father without a father. Not the American revolutionary immortalized in rap by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I'm talking about our Alexander Hamilton, whose adventure story is no less amazing. Our Alexander Hamilton, who was born Ali Ahmed Abouchadi, arrived in Alberta in 1905 from his home in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. He was just 12 years old. He and his uncle, Sen Abouchadi, came to Alberta via Winnipeg, hoping to strike it rich in the Klondike goldfields. Finding themselves almost a decade late for the gold rush, they decided to become traveling fur traders instead, buying pelts from Cree and Métis trappers around Lac La Biche, then selling them in Edmonton. When young Ali was just 16, his uncle decided to go back to Lebanon, leaving the teenager all alone to make his own way on the western frontier. But Ali, who changed his name at that point to Alexander, made his fortune, and I do mean his fortune, as a fur trader, merchant, farmer, cattle salesman, and finally in one of Alberta's first dealer of Ford automobiles. One of the first Lebanese pioneers to settle in Alberta, immigrants. They get the job done. Hamilton was soon followed by a wave of others from the Bekaa Valley, some of them inspired by his early successes. There were Hamdens and Terabanes, Shabans and Sadies, Moalims and Kazels and Chaddies, Awids and Jomas and Amories, Haymors and Saloms and Darwishes, cousins and friends and in-laws and neighbors who emigrated one by one after the other from small Lebanese villages such as Lala and Kabilias and Kebat Ruha. Peddlers and shopkeepers, fur merchants and farmers, ranchers and restaurateurs, they left their homes half a world away to become settlers on a vast new frontier. For the Indigenous peoples of Alberta, this wave of settlement in the wake of the treaties was a profoundly difficult and unjust time. But the Lebanese newcomers learned Cree and Dene and forged strong bonds of friendships with the First Nations and Métis people they met as they built new lives for themselves as traders and merchants in Lac La Biche, Fort Chipewyan, Fort McMurray, Athabasca, and High Prairie, plying the rivers north to the Northwest Territories in search of the best furs. Now, when you think of fur traders and homesteaders and ranchers, when you think of Alberta pioneers, Lebanese immigrants might not be the first people who come to mind. But there were Lebanese settlers in Alberta from the very moment it became a province, and they laid the foundation for the vibrant multicultural province we were to become. Without their contributions, Alberta would not be the province we know today. The first to arrive were single men, but the women soon followed and left their mark on their new homeland. Women such as the formidable Hilwe Joma Hamdan. Born in 1905 in Lebanon, Hilwe moved to northern Alberta as a bride of 17 to join her husband, Ali Hamdan, a successful fur trader, who greeted her on her arrival with a full-length sable coat. The couple spent their early married life in Fort Chipewyan, a primarily First Nations community in the north of the province. There, Hilwe formed enduring friendships with her Indigenous neighbors, learning to speak both Cree and Chipewyan. An Edmonton Journal story from 1964 reported that one of the local chiefs had dubbed her, quote, the finest white woman in the north. Hilwe hosted visiting celebrity bush pilots, including Wap May and Punch Dickens, in her home. But as their family grew, Hilwe wanted a better education for their 6 children and insisted they all move to Edmonton, where she soon became a leader in the capital's growing Lebanese community. Now, you may already know that Edmonton was home to Canada's first mosque, the Al Rashid. You might not have known that it was Hilwe Hamdan who led the charm offensive that got that mosque built. She convinced Edmonton Mayor John Fry that the city should donate the land. Then she convinced Muslims and Arabs all across Alberta and Saskatchewan, as well as Edmontonians of all faiths and backgrounds, to donate to the mosque, raising the necessary $5,000 to pay for construction. The mosque was built by Ukrainian-Canadian contractor Mike Durroth. Mike had never seen a mosque, so he designed the Al-Rashid to look like a Ukrainian church, complete with those distinctive onion domes that mark Eastern Christian churches, one onion bulb atop each minaret. You could hardly imagine a more uniquely Edmonton building than one that fused Lebanese and Ukrainian culture and aesthetics into a harmonious whole. The original Al-Rashid opened in 1938 and stands today in Fort Edmonton Historic Park, Edmonton's Living History Museum, where young Muslim guides provide tourism programming through the summer, teaching tourists and reminding Edmontonians about our city's deep Lebanese and Muslim roots. And in 2017, the Edmonton Public School Board opened Hilwy Hamden School, named in honor of this remarkable Edmonton champion of education and inclusion. While many of Alberta's early Lebanese settlers were Muslim, others were Christian or Druze, and certainly not all of them were northern fur traders. Isper Shaker, for example, got his start in the small Alberta town of Hanna, where he ran the local movie theater. He would later go on to become the mayor of Hanna, and though he himself was Christian, not Muslim, he traveled to Edmonton and attended the opening of the Al-Rashid Mosque as a special guest of honor. William Haddad, the son of Lebanese shopkeeper Albognor Farhat Haddad, graduated from law school at the University of Alberta in 1941, becoming one of Canada's first Lebanese lawyers. He served in the Navy during the Second World War, became president of the Edmonton Bar Association, the first chair of the Edmonton Police Commission, the vice chair of the Alberta Securities Commission, and finally a judge on the Alberta Court of Appeal, one of the first Arab judges in Canada. And in keeping with such legal tradition, just last month, Edmonton lawyer and community leader Bob Alanisi, the son of Lebanese immigrants, was appointed to the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench, becoming, I do believe, Alberta's first Druze judge. Of course, the first Lebanese pioneers were joined in Alberta by later waves of immigrants in the 1950s, in the 1970s, and continuing to this day. By 1969, the Muslim population in Lac La Biche made up about 10% of the town's total population, the largest proportion of Muslims in any town or city in North America at that time. Today, 1 in 6 people in Lac La Biche can claim Lebanese roots, and the town claims it has the highest proportion of Lebanese Canadians in the country. Alberta certainly has by far the largest Lebanese population outside of Quebec and Ontario. This has perhaps given Albertans, especially Edmontonians, a disproportionate passion for hummus and doner. The Edmonton novelist Todd Babiuk, not Lebanese himself, once wrote that it was impossible to have a party of any kind in Edmonton without someone bringing hummus. Now, Ottawa may think it has cornered the market on shawarma, and Halifax might think it can claim the doner, although Edmonton has something to say about that. Alberta, though, can certainly claim the Lebanese-inflected Burger Baron mushroom burger, recently immortalized by the award-winning Edmonton author, journalist, and documentary maker Omar Moualem in his film The Last Baron, which tracked the social history of Lebanese immigration via the stories of the Burger Baron restaurants that were and are landmarks across the prairies. Less calorically, Alberta will also proudly claim Canada's first Lebanese cabinet minister, Larry Shaben, who served with distinction in the cabinets of Premiers Peter Lougheed and Don Getty, and who was the first Muslim appointed to any provincial or federal cabinet in Canada. Notably, while commuting north to his riding in High Prairie, Larry Shaben survived a horrific small plane crash that killed 6 people, including his friend and colleague, the Alberta NDP leader Grant Notley, father of Rachel Notley. The story of Shaben's extraordinary escape, not just from death in the crash, but from death in the freezing northern wilderness, was told in the award-winning book Into the Abyss, written by acclaimed Lebanese-Canadian journalist Carol Shaben, Larry Shaben's own daughter. Edmonton was also home to Canada's first ever Muslim judge, Ed Sadie, the proud son of Lebanese immigrants and one of my dad's oldest friends. They grew up together at Edmonton's Boyle Street, where Lebanese and Jewish kids shared a special bond. Today, Alberta's Lebanese community, Muslim, Christian, Druze, or decidedly secular, is stronger than ever, whether its members are newly arrived immigrants or fourth-generation Albertans. Those deep, deep roots are among the reasons that Edmonton's Public School Board currently offers Arabic bilingual immersion programs at 6 of its public schools. They're the reason the Edmonton Journal recently reported that there are nearly 120 shops and restaurants in Edmonton with Donair as part of their name, which, in the words of Post Media columnist Chad Huckaluck, dwarfs Calgary's minuscule 50 and Toronto's less than 20. And they're the reason Edmonton is proudly home to the Canadian Druze Centre and a significant population of the Druze diaspora in North America. I guess you might say every month in Alberta is Lebanese Heritage Month. But I don't think anyone back home will object to having an excuse every November to celebrate, and I'll bring the hummus. To Senator Cordy, I say thank you, merci, hi, and sukran. Thank you.
Senator Jaffer, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Your Honor.
Senator Simons, will you take a question from Senator Jaffer? Senator Jaffer.
Thank you, Senator Simons, and thank you, Senator Cordy, for your speech and also for starting this inquiry, and Senator for your speech on Edmonton. I may have missed it, but wasn't the first Muslim mosque also, I may have missed you saying it, but the first Muslim mosque was also built in Edmonton. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I think you did miss it. In 1938, it opened in downtown Edmonton on a gift of land from the city of Edmonton with $5,000 raised from communities across the West. I have to say the original mosque was moved brick by brick and now stands in Fort Edmonton. But the Al-Rashid Mosque endures as one of the largest mosques in Western Canada, throwing open its doors in times of fire and disaster. The Al-Rashid Mosque has been remarkable for welcoming the homeless during cold snaps, for opening its doors to people who were fleeing the Fort McMurray wildfires. It's an extraordinarily important part of Edmonton's cultural and social community.
Senator,
may I ask a second question, Your Honor and Senator Simon?
If I have time, absolutely.
Thank you. Senator Simon, what I did mean to say that it was moved, and it's something that us Muslims celebrate, that it was the first mosque ever built. And of course, the women from that mosque are some of the most forward-looking, including the Fallman, Mrs. Fallman, who was the sort of a matriarch of all the women's movement in the Muslim community. So thank you for raising that. And Senator Simons, I think you would agree that the Muslim community is still very vibrant in that Al-Rashid Mosque.
Absolutely. I mean, I think those first Lebanese pioneers laid down a foundation that has allowed Muslim immigrants from around the world to come and find a home in Edmonton, whether they're coming from North Africa or East Africa or Indonesia. Wherever Muslims have come to Edmonton, the Al-Rashid Mosque community has been there to welcome them. You mentioned Lila Fallman. I didn't raise her in my speech for one reason, which is that her family was Syrian rather than Lebanese. And I know the border is liminal, but since this was about Lebanese Heritage Month, I wanted to focus on Hilwi Hamdan, who was the remarkable woman who fought for the Al-Rashid Mosque, which was indeed the first mosque in Canada. Interestingly enough, the first mosque in North America was, I believe, in North Dakota and not in Chicago or New York, as you might have expected. So there was really an important Lebanese diaspora that came and filled up that whole prairie west on both sides of the Canadian-American border.